Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Frank with another episode of RRX Podcast. Can I get my co-hosts to introduce themselves?
Hey, this is Matt.
Hi, this is Kyra.
And I'm Lady D.
All right, so for this episode, we're going to talk about educational differences between the sexes. Okay, educational differences between the sexes. Now, one of the biggest things when it comes down to education that I think of, especially with education being a passion of mine, is the aspect of how difficult it was for me to understand what path I wanted to go in reference to not only me being a man, but also me being a black man. What path I wanted to go when it came down to getting my education and also doing what I need to do when it came down to getting certain credentials so I can, go ahead and go for my passion, which is education. Now, for me, education was something that I really didn't understand, at a young age, let alone really cared about. And I think that's one of the things that often is happening in modern society when it comes down to most men not really understanding education, let alone essentially education fields when it comes down to various schools, be it elementary school, junior high school, middle school, what may have you, even higher education. You have more so a lot more men this day and age not really wanting to be formally educated, but then you also have more women wanting to be formally educated. Um, One of the biggest things that I've noticed when it comes down to education is how the education system is, let alone how women or young girls are educated, compared to how young men or men needing to be educated. And I think there's a difference that needs to happen that is not happening in formal education, where oftentimes, if you can see, the template of how different schools end up, setting their curriculums, setting the educational environment, oftentimes it's more so geared toward or more so for, you know, based on me looking at different stats, more so geared toward young women, more so geared toward, the young lady that, can sit still, is able to, not, be obnoxious or anything, or not able to, put themselves in mindset of, trying to disrupt the class, what may have you. Where, most cases, it's really geared toward that young woman or the young lady or the young girl who is naturally able to do certain things, at a certain age or at a younger age compared to most young men, boys, men, not really able to do that automatically based on, what is going on within their body, what is going on with their mind, compared to, the young lady, young girl, what may have you, which can speak to the differences of, men and women, or the differences between boys and girls. And one of the things that is now really happening is you have more so your young boys, young men, not really wanting to, deal with education, not want to be educated, what may have you, having not really good experiences when it comes down to education. And oftentimes, most educational environments are more so, as far as the template of being able to understand both genders, most educational environments don't really have a foundation of understanding that. When it comes down to specifically how to be able to educate the young boy compared to how to educate the young girl. Okay. I believe most educational environments now, which probably is set up in a certain way, maybe this is something that we can, speak on. Most educational environments are more so geared toward um, not really dealing with the testosterone levels of a young boy, and a young boy being able to understand how to control, the energy they have within them compared to it being geared for the young girl who really doesn't have to deal with that and more so can fit within, an educational environment more so. What y'all think?
Okay, so off rip. That's to me that's a kind of a cookie cutter statement because all
Mm.
girls don't learn in that way. For
Okay.
mine, I can use myself as an example.
Okay.
I'm a tactile learner. I have to do to learn it. And then I have dyscalculia, which I've had to diagnose myself,
Oh.
come to find out,
Okay. Okay.
because I struggled with math from first grade through college.
Mm.
So we all don't learn the same. I literally, if you go beyond 4 steps to a math problem, you lose me.
Mm. Okay. Okay.
So when we got to quadratic equations, I cried literally every night because I could not process how to get all these steps to make sense.
Okay.
So I always failed in math. And I'll be honest, I had to take the remedial math class at least 6 times in college because I could not get to the point where you could get through college level math class.
Okay.
And the only reason I finally passed the math class was because I was in a math class with a room full of seniors that said, if we do not pass, there's going to be problems in these streets. That is the only reason I passed my college level math class. Thank God for those things, seniors.
Okay. I mean,
Literally, they all came together and said that to the teacher.
power in numbers, power in numbers, But one thing I want to say is the particular perspective that I'm speaking on is what is happening when it comes down to grade school education now, more so in the States, as far as a foundational level, not necessarily saying that there aren't exceptions to the rule, because there are. There are multiple exceptions to the rule. But as of
So,
right, okay, what you got?
so I think right now, just watching for my kids, it's going into again a situation where it's kind of cookie cutter because they're all on computers. So you're not giving tactile learners an opportunity to actually learn the way that they can learn. So I feel like there's gonna be a lot of kids messed up coming up now because everything's on a Chromebook. My daughter uses her Chromebook in class all the time. Luckily, thank God, she took after her father when it comes to certain things. And I feel like she'll be more successful than I would because I think about if I was in her shoes right now, I guarantee you I'd be struggling
Hmm.
because I can't sit in front of a computer and say I'm going to absorb the information. That doesn't work for me.
Oh,
So I feel for kids. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I completely agree with you in the scope of various teaching methods not being available because now, of course, one of the main reasons that most kids are in front of computers. One because of the hybrid styles that people needed to implement as far as what has been going on with the pandemic. In addition to that, legitimately you are having teachers being hired that are based on the administration being told you will only teach in this way or being told you cannot teach in these ways you know
Mm.
in addition to the particular type of school, because you now have various schools that have different learning styles that they will only delve
Mm.
into. To give an example, Montessori, that's one particular type of school. Then you have your charter schools that vary when it comes down to the different methods that are implemented at those schools. you know so there are so many options, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, which option is most beneficial for your child, your children, you know? And then if you have multiple
Right.
children, okay, when it comes down to this child, what is beneficial for this child? What is beneficial for that child? Because I know for a fact, the son is going to, learn different from the daughter, but then also the two daughters are going to end up learning different from one another, because they're two totally different people, two totally different mindsets, you know, that need to be understood in the
Mhm.
scope of them being able to absorb information and apply it where it's needed. You know,
Mhm.
where
Right.
the biggest thing, and the only reason why I bring up the cookie cutter style, because oftentimes the cookie cutter style is what's more so being pushed at the forefront when it comes down to the majority of schools. In my personal opinion, it's not good because not every kid learns the same way. In addition to that, I believe not every gender learns the same way.
And that's very true. I mean, men are more um, hands-on. They also learn by doing in certain areas versus other areas. For example, like in math, men are more internal in processing math than women
True.
are. So
Very
math
studies.
classes are generally geared towards being to internally process math versus the someone or versus you trying to figure it out tactilely. So that's where the gender split in that way in that specific subject is math, and that's why I always struggled because it was always on the board and you have to calculate it and figure it out in your head. And of course, most of the boys in the class always got it, but for some of the girls, it was a struggle, especially for me. Again, I struggled with that subject. But when it came to like history and stuff, I excelled. In science, I excelled
Hmm.
because I can internally process that. And for males in science, sometimes that's a struggle because they can't internally process the steps that necessarily takes to figure out a chemical breakdown of something. And that's more of like where females excel in that in science field. Can internally break that down.
What do y'all think of the aspect of, if I could say this, and I'll put it in this perspective. So, believe it or not, um, I, as far as studies, delving into studies, one of the things I see that young girls, or women are more so good at when it comes down to the aspect of learning. Young women, girls, are more so good at the aspect of learning things better in a social aspect in addition to an emotional aspect. Whereas young boys or young men, goes to that aspect of kinesthetic, when it comes down to, learning, doing things with your hands, so on and so forth, in addition to the aspect of, consistent verbal, dynamics, where you're constantly, having to say things over and over and over again so it can be embedded in their mind for them to be able to apply what they're being told or what they're being taught. What do y'all think?
So say I concur or I can second Kyra on some of that, and only on some of it because, like we were saying, it's people, it's person specific, so it's not a general style or way of learning.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, I guess for in my experience or for me, I think that women or girls are much more elaborative learners, analytical learners. I would even say, yeah, like those are the terms I would use,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm looking at something, whether it's mathematics or something, let's just take a paper for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to look at a paper because I can't just look at a paper. I don't see a paper and just see like words. Or when I look at a paper, it's bad because I'm checking even subconsciously for every little teeny detail. I'm looking for capitalization. I'm looking at pronouns. I'm looking at punctuation. It is a serious like issue. It is not an issue, but I can't look at it until it is like right. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing if you give me an Excel spreadsheet. Until the sheet is formatted in a way where it's easier, okay, for me to read or for me to follow it, I can't process it. It just doesn't make sense, right? Same thing with math. I think math is a subject that boys excel at, actually just easier than girls, but not. I wouldn't say. Let me give a caveat that I wouldn't say easier than girls. I would say Like girls look at math, and I think that they overthink it a lot. That's what I would say.
Okay.
And I think that falls in line of the whole analytical, effortful, it's too much that they're focusing on. And I think where men excel is that they just focus on what they need to and they use logic for it, what makes the most sense. Where I think women are more like, wait, it's too many variables. I can't figure this out. Like this doesn't make sense. When in actuality it does make sense. It's just too much information to process at one time,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
For them to process, for the majority, I think to process. I'm not going to say I excelled at math in school either, but I will say post school. So let's just say now I'm actually very good at it, and I don't know why, right? So those of us who took music know that theory is all math.
It
At
is.
some point, it is math, 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 math. I sucked at theory because I sucked at math. And I didn't necessarily suck at it completely, but like when we got to like counterpoint and like fugues, it was extreme. It was hard. It wasn't hard for me to sit down and write it. I could write it, right? I understand stood music. I could read music fine. When it came to all the other kind of, nuances of it, I was just like, the math part is really killing me right now. It's just killing me. And that's something I had to explain to my aunt because she was like, well, why are you feeling theory? I said, it's math. She couldn't believe it. So I sat her down and I showed her what it looked like. I said, to you, this looks like notes on a piece of paper. To someone who understands music, it doesn't look like that. You're literally counting. You're counting every step of the way. And if something is off, then you may have to go back as in math and change something, or it changes an entire rhythm. It changes an entire beat. So it just depends on. It's just so math. I think is something like that. But I was going to say that that's what I was going to say. I think that women, for the most part, at least for me, that's how I look at things. I'm very, and I've been told that. I've even been told by, even in like the workplace, I've been told I'm very thorough or analytical. But that's because it's not so much that I know it all or whatever, but it's because I need to make sure everything lines up, right? Everything makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, how am I going to process it? Kind of like what Kyra said.
Okay.
But it could be just me overthinking it, right? I don't think men look at things like that. For example, this is a perfect example.
Okay.
My niece came over.
Hmm.
We thought it was a good idea to get like some paint, right? So we go to Michael's and we get paint. This is slightly embarrassing. We get paint and canvases. We bring it back to the house. We pick up donuts. We got everything, right? Get on the floor, put down the, getting prepared to paint. And if anybody ever painted like with like watercolors and things like that from Michael's, we got like a set. Okay, we noticed that when we took off the off the paint top, that we couldn't get the paint out of the actual tube. Okay,
Hmm.
so we used like like a paper clip. I think I had like I had like an earring this time to just poke hole in it. So then my boyfriend came home and he was looking at us and he said, he said, wait, I have a knife. So he had a knife and he poked holes in like two of them. Then he said, do you need holes in all of them? And we were like, yeah, right? I'm 36, my niece is 10. We're on the same wavelength, okay? Same gender. Lamarck basically says, oh, but you know what the top is for. I had no idea. The end of the top that you take off the tube, it's like a little pointy part.
Yeah.
You use that to poke the holes.
Holes in.
But that's an example of how we were thinking about it the long way. And he just kind of came over and said, no, Natalie, you just take this and you just post and all the things. And I was just like, oh my God. But that's an example. It was two of us working together trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
But if you had never, like, I had never worked with paint that way, I would have never known what that little pointy part was for. He just kind of looked at it, he processed it very quickly, and he was like, better solution. Let's take this, let's just propose and all the paint.
Mm.
I didn't process it that way. I totally overlooked that point. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
here's one thing, and I'll definitely say about what you just said. So I I agree with you. I definitely agree with you in the scope of most women being able to think very analytically. Um, However, I don't necessarily believe it's just in the scope of most women being able to think analytically. What I do believe is it's in the scope of women being able to think analytically because they are using their emotional intelligence to be able to deconstruct things. Okay? Where, when, and I'll put it in this perspective, you have, logical way of thinking, but then you also have an emotional way of thinking. I believe both are equally important because both help to balance out the human being, no matter what gender you are, right? Some people, can be more emotional and, less logical, but then you have others that are more logical and less emotional. Baseline level, baseline level, you have a good amount of men that are more logical, less emotional. Baseline women, good amount of women are more emotional, less logical. Okay? Doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot use either side. It's just being able to tap into either side in certain ways that they end up learning how to tap in that side. And let me put myself out there as an example. Okay? Um, I know I can be very logical about shit, but I also know how to tap into my emotional state, which helps me to deconstruct things and then reconstruct them back up to a hovering topic. To give an example, one of the things that I use all the time when it comes down to being able to learn things, I use what is called mind mapping. Okay, mind mapping. It is an actual concept that there are books out there that people can read when it comes down to mind mapping. Overall, uh, mind mapping, all it is just an example of being able to take a concept and use, kind of a template of what would be kind of considered a family tree. And you use that hovering concept as, the baseline, let's just say matriarch and patriarch of a family, right? And of course, the deconstruction would be, obviously the main matriarch and patriarch having kids, and then those kids having kids, getting married, having kids, so on and so forth. Now, let me take the concept of mind mapping and talk about, I don't know, let's just say sandwiches, right? Sandwiches. Basic concept. Most people understand sandwiches. Most people have eaten a sandwich, right? Where I could talk about sandwiches. Now, let me go ahead, and make some babies to the concept of sandwiches, and now talk about various topics such as the bread that you're going to use, the particular meat that you're going to use, if you're going to use cheese, if you're going to put condiments, various condiments on the sandwich, right? Vegetables. Vegetables can also go on a sandwich too. Now, let me go ahead and break those down, right? When it comes down to, let's just say I go ahead and pick condiments. What are the various condiments that can go on a sandwich? You know, you got mayonnaise, you know what I'm saying? You got, mustard, you got relish. Relish could also go within the concept of vegetables. You know what I'm saying? You also have ranch dressing. Some people put ranch dressing, on their sandwiches. Some people put, a little bit of oil, maybe some vinegar. You know. Now, let me go ahead with that being broken down when it comes down to condiments. Let me go ahead and let's just say let's take, I don't know, mustard, right? What are the various types of mustard that I could potentially put on a sandwich? You know, you have Dijon mustard, you have honey mustard, you know, but then I could also, take, you know, the particular brands of ranch dressing that I could potentially put on the sandwich, you know, where that can also be a form of deconstructing, going back up to the hovering topic of reconstructing back to the hovering topic of Sandwiches. That's what I do in my mind when I'm looking at things that I now need to break down and learn. You know, I deconstruct it and I reconstruct it back to whatever the hovering topic is. I do that with IT all the time as far as my job. Information technology. Okay, right now, what are we using? We're using a computer. You know what I'm saying? Some computer in some shape or form, be it a smartphone or a desktop, right? Okay, what is in this computer? What are the various components? There is a form of a CPU or a central processing unit within this computer. You know, what does the CPU do? It helps to process the information that is coming to the computer when it comes down to ones and zeros. All right, what are ones and zeros? You know, Binary language that only a computer is able to read because a computer doesn't understand normal human language. You know, for me, it took me quite a bit of time to be able to get to a point where I'm able to process information in that way. Which speaks to the aspect of, at one time, me legitimately hating education because at one time I only saw education as just a form of indoctrination. But I had to realize during my younger years, not all of my teachers knew how to teach me specifically. Not all of my teachers knew how to teach young boys. Not all of my teachers knew how to teach young boys who were black. Where one of the main reasons why I have a passion for education is because, just being real about it, I would like for all our people to be educated, not necessarily indoctrinated in certain ways of thinking that doesn't help us collectively to either do what we need to do when it comes down to being successful in life, or do what we need to do when it comes down to being able to come together better. Nevertheless, there are things that foundationally we already know for a fact women are good at. There are things that foundationally we already know men are good at. But also, in turn, you do have exceptions to a rule. In addition to the ability to be able to find out other things that you thought you wouldn't be good at, find out later on, oh, it's just a process of being able to learn this thing, so now I can be good at it at a certain level. And then potentially try to strive to reach a higher level when it comes down to said concept. Anybody got anything to say?
I wouldn't even say that it's entirely. I agree, but I was gonna. I wouldn't even say it's entirely the process. I would also say that it's relatability.
Mm.
So one of the reasons why I was able to kind of get better, I guess, at math after school, okay, is that I was able to now relate it to life. It made sense.
Yeah.
So, and that goes a long way. If you can relate to something, that opens up an entire new world.
Yeah.
That teaches you something within itself. And I think that when it comes to teaching black boys in specific, you know, it's a lot that has to be done beforehand. You
Yeah.
have to educate yourself
Yeah.
beforehand on what you're walking into, first of all,
Yeah.
and not have an assumption, I guess, because not all black boys are raised the same. Not all black boys, know the same thing. It just depends. And some of them have a barrier. Before you can even teach them something, you have to relate to them. So meet them where they are,
Right.
help break the barrier, and then teach them. And don't just teach them. You're gonna have to sit there and educate them and nurture them and make them feel like they are important, because they are. But you have some teachers who just don't do that. They don't have enough of that. It kind of goes back to that saying where you've ever heard mothers, what is it, raise their daughters but love their sons, type of thing.
Can I can I
So,
can I s- can I say something on that note?
Yeah.
Foundationally, and this is a question I'm gonna put out there, and it's particular point that I want to make when it comes down to putting this question out there. Foundationally, what is the majority as far as gender that are in education, let alone your varying educational levels? When it comes down to elementary school, junior high school, middle school, high school, even higher education. What is the primary gender that often are educators?
Women.
Women,
Women.
right?
I don't think I saw a male teacher
Mhm.
like junior high school.
Point made. I didn't see my first male teacher until middle school.
And in most cases, when you do have a male teacher, like I remember at Duke, I had Mr. Burrows.
Miss Burrow was dope. That
Mr.
man, that
Burrows
man
was
was
the
dope.
coolest,
Coolest.
dopest male
Facts.
teacher
Facts.
I ever had in my
Facts.
life. I mean, he was a smart, educated brother, but he was like just down to earth.
Yeah.
And I like that about him. It wasn't any tension like when I went into his classroom. I didn't feel afraid. Like he was there to answer any questions you had. He was real chill and real laid back. But
You know,
I liked him for that.
it's funny
But he
that
was a math teacher.
right. It's funny
Yeah,
that
yeah. He's a math.
it's funny that you mentioned that because oftentimes when it comes down to the trope of who are the best educators or who are the best teachers, because we have been so used to a society that more so sees women in that role, you know, when you see the opposite of that role, it's like, okay, what's going to come with this? You know, like what's going to come with this? Okay, this is my first male teacher, depending on, when you actually had your first male teacher. Okay, what's going to come with this? Or, is he going to act like, essentially all of the female teachers that I've had, or is he going to, teach in his own style, you know, or, should I be worried about him teaching differently than the other teachers that I've had? Or should I have that in mind at all? You know? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think no, I get it. I get it. And I was gonna say that not Mr. Burroughs, but actually I can even say that Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson teaching voice laid a kind of a foundation for me when it came to male teachers.
mm-hmm.
Because now I prefer not to have, and this I may be biased because I did have him as a teacher, but I felt a connection in his teaching style. He had many students, but I felt like he knew his students, he knew what they needed,
Right.
and that's what he educated on, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I don't want a female vocal technique teacher. That's just what I feel. And I don't know if it'll still be the same type of relationship. It might be, it might not be. But that kind of set the tone for me. And I feel that way about lady doctors. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that. They're not teachers, but you still have a relationship with them. I feel like, I feel that way. And you have some women who feel very differently about that, right? They feel as though, no, I want a woman doctor because she knows more about the body. She has every component of the body that I do. Why would I not want a woman doctor? Okay, you're entitled to that. I prefer a man doctor for that. So,
Like, I know me going into the field of education, I already understand that I am a minority. You know? I get it. Totally get it. Doesn't necessarily mean that I should shy away from a field where I know for a fact I'm going to be a minority. What it does mean is maybe somewhere along the line, I can also help those young men or men that are trying to educate themselves and they're trying to see an example of, okay, if he is on this level, then potentially I know I can do it. Or I know I can reach a certain level when it comes down to not only being educated, but also educating myself at a certain level. You know? With that said, speaking on the aspect of what is happening right now, when it comes down to most men this day and age not going, to college, let alone majority of women going to college. What do y'all think about that? What do y'all
I
think
have
about
something
that?
to say.
Okay.
Maybe I don't know. Here's what I think about that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that I have it's a whole bunch of things in my brain right now that I'm trying to figure out what I want to get out. For one, I think that men are, at least from what I've seen, are on the whole tip of I can do it myself, meaning that they are more entrepreneurial spirited than women. That's just what I feel.
Okay.
And I think that some women feel like, but I have to go to school to get this. I need to go get this. I have, I'm an educated black woman, whatever you want to call it. So, but then you have men who have arrived to the same status that you. They didn't go to college. They kind of just maybe took a trade, learned how to do something, figured out how to market and build their brand. Whoop, there it is. Okay,
Yeah.
so that kind of brings back to what Kyra was saying with tactile learning, and then you have, non-tactile learning. So I don't think, and then you got it where boys, they see women educating them. That's not relatability. If they don't see men teaching, why would they feel like they need to become educators? Right? They may not feel that way.
Yeah. I'll
And maybe women don't do a good job at teaching all boys, and vice versa. So you got that going there too. So you got
I've seen more. I'll put it like this: the higher in education that I've gone, the more I've seen male teachers, male educators, male professors. The higher in education that I've gone, the more I've seen, more males. When it comes down to elementary school, it was uh, like a zebra in the bush. You don't know when you're gonna find one. You know what I'm saying?
it's true. But you know what? I think that has something to do with age also. Like if you think about it, women, those are your babies. So you got your kindergartners, you got your first grade, second grade, third grade. Sometimes, depending on where the male mind is, he's probably not like, I don't really want to be with kids. Right? I
Okay.
mean, if
Okay.
you,
That's
if
fair.
you think about it,
That's fair to
most
say.
men probably don't want to, probably feel like that's not their best, that's not their best position. Most women feel like, oh, I don't mind. I have a nurturing spirit. Not to say that they shouldn't be there, but that may be why we don't see a lot of men teachers
Hmm.
in like grade school, or elementary school.
One of the things that I've told myself, I'm gonna be real about it. The only reason why I decided to get these degrees is because I know for me to be a professor at a university, I at least at minimum have to have my PhD or doctorate. That's the only reason why I got these pieces of paper. Other than that, I would not have gotten these pieces of paper if I didn't need them for being in higher education. you know, because that's really what it is. No, you can get your master's degree, but at most you're going to be a assistant professor somewhere. Always, you have to have your doctorate, and then, going to the aspect of having a post doctorate, potentially, where probably by the time I'm 50 or something, I'm probably gonna have like 5 degrees. You know, that's the way it's looking. Especially if I'm gonna get a second master's degree in addition to getting my first PhD. You know what I'm saying? But I know not all men have this mindset. Most men just want to be able to work. They just want to be able to make some bread. Most men are out there more so when it comes down to the majority of us, the 80%, using 80-20 rule, the 80% that is in the middle, most of us are just trying to make some bread to be able to pay the bills. Make some bread to be able to actually have some on the dinner table at night. You know what I'm saying? Most of us are in that mindset. in addition to the aspect of which I, agree with you, Nat, the aspect of entrepreneurship or doing for self, not always having to ask somebody for something, not always having to rely on somebody for something. You know what I'm saying? Especially when it comes down to the relying piece. Because in society, men often really are taught through societal norms, you need to be making something. You need to create your value. Let me put in that perspective. You need to create your value. You know? That's often what we are taught. You know? Where that also puts a damper on how we may see education. You know? If we know for a fact we can teach ourselves something, then we are creating our value and we're going to run with that. We're going to run with that automatically. You know? Yeah, I got these degrees and everything, but also in turn, got a certification when it comes down to also being able to teach English as a secondary language, in addition to having my electrician certification. A lot of people don't know about that, but if I speak on the electrician piece, you know what I'm saying, that I know with that I can use to always eat. If I speak on that, most cases, based on how society is, everybody is looking for a degree. You know? And I know I could get more certifications. I know I could get more certifications when it comes down to IT. The only IT certification I have is my Security Plus certification, which is a CompTIA certification, which is a Microsoft certification. You know? But the whole dynamic of men having to create our value is always going to be the dominant, because that is how society is normalized, has normalized the aspect of looking at men. As this last point, I'm gonna say this last point, especially when it comes down to most women seeing men in certain ways in the scope of hypergamy. But that is another conversation. What you got, Nat?
I was going to say that I agree. I also was going to say I was going to bring up a point that Kevin Samuels brought up.
Okay.
I don't agree with everything he says, but it was one thing he said
It's
that I
funny.
was like, okay.
It's funny. It's funny that you got to say that as a disclaimer. Like, I don't agree with everything you said, but
I
go ahead.
don't,
Go
I
ahead.
don't, but I do agree with some of what he said. Even if I don't respect his delivery, I don't discredit his
The knowledge.
I don't
You don't
discredit.
discredit the
Yes,
knowledge.
I don't
Okay.
discredit his knowledge.
All right.
I just feel the way I feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was something he said, and he was on a podcast with a tip of my tongue. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was speaking on this podcast
Mm-hmm.
as a guest speaker, and he basically said that when women, I was gonna, he said that when women, women are taught. Don't quote me. This is not quoted Kevin Samuels. If you happen to listen to this,
You're paraphrasing. You're paraphrasing. Paraphrasing.
I am paraphrasing,
Yeah.
very much so, very much so.
Yeah.
He said something to the point of women um, want to have equality, right?
Mm.
And women want to be sometimes the person in charge, and they want to do this, blah 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 blah. But he said, but men understand. No, no, no. He said, but when something goes wrong, a woman knows that if something goes wrong, she can call somebody. She has the ability to call somebody. And usually when she does that, who is it? It's a man.
Often.
I say if she's calling the police, she knows that she can call for help and help will come. That's what he said. He said, but a man knows that who is he going to call? He is the person that's being called for help. He is the person. So when I bring that back to what we're talking about, it kind of speaks mountains to me right now, like in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
because it's very true. Go
Yep.
ahead, because you look like you got something
I
that's
just
on your.
I don't mean to cut you off, but
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
what you're saying is golden. Now, one of the things that I will say about Kevin Samuels, right? He does speak on a lot of knowledge, but his knowledge is placed in certain areas and conveyed in a certain way to where Not only is he conveying knowledge, but he is doing it in the scope of creating division also. Okay? That's the only thing that I have an issue with when it comes down to him, in the scope of him not being able to understand how to create a voice that is for creating collectivism. I don't think he knows how to do that, especially with him being at a certain status for so long and him not having a need to try to do that. Now, on the other hand, he does convey a good amount of knowledge that I believe all of us, both black men and women, need to delve into and be able to understand, right? On the point that you're making, in addition to the point that I just made, in addition to, Kevin Samuel's, piece that you just stated, the whole aspect of men having to create our value oftentimes has been, or not even oftentimes, really has. It has been birthed out of the scope of patriarchy. It's been birthed out of that, being real about it. In addition to the aspect of how we have seen women when it comes down to placing them in the disposition of them having inherent value, which is what? What do you think y'all inherent value is? That y'all automatically gonna have, and inevitably y'all just have it, regardless of anything that y'all do, what may have you. What do you think that is? Any thoughts? I believe it's the scope of oftentimes taking it back to y'all having the inherent value of being able to have children.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Kyra wanted to join in. But go ahead. I was waiting for.
Oh, yeah, Kyrie, you got something to say? Because I mean,
No,
I'm
no,
gonna
no.
explain.
I was trying to give somebody else the floor.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna explain what I'm saying. Where we have to create our value because we have to, and for the longest, when it comes down to us, being bred in society in a certain way, having societal norms, we had to go out and work, do labor, do all of the necessary things that back in the day was a necessity for making sure we were able to build a home, you know, build a home for a family, right? Whereas the value, mind you, I still talk on patriarchy, right? The value of the woman was she had inherent value when it comes down to her being able to have children, raise those children, be able to be there for the children while the man was out doing what he needed to do to be able to bring something home. Okay? We're now not in a society anymore where that is a prominent factor, in addition to the dynamics of everybody having their specific rights to be able to do essentially anything and everything they want to do. Okay? Case in point, women being able to, get their education, being able to get their degrees, so on and so forth. But then you have men that are now more so not really striving to get a degree, but more so be able to create something on their own that they can call their own, that they can say is theirs and nobody else's. You know?
That's what I was going to say. I think that society leaves them no choice but to do that. Not to say that women aren't doing it, but I feel like it's more of a I have to do this sort of mentality when it comes to men, right? Like that's what I get from it, at least. I think that, I also say that I think that a lot of times men are more fearless in that way than women. I think that women can be, and even myself can be more apprehensive when it comes to should I start this business? Should I do this? Right? I think that women can be forethinkers for a lot of things, but sometimes, it just doesn't work out. Go
Okay.
ahead. I'm sorry. You like
Okay.
you want to say something?
Oh, Coward, what you got to say?
I mean, so biologically, yes, we are more precautious when it comes to taking risk, and men are more risk takers. That's why they are like the hunters, and they go out and they're more likely to get killed by a mastodon than we are because they just think let's get it and we process the consequences of if we go out here and get it. So biologically, yes, we are more precautious because nature made us that way. That way we can be there to take care of the family unit if something happened to the hunter going out there,
with the spear,
recklessly to catch dinner.
spear chucked. But go ahead. I'm sorry. What you got to say?
I agree. I agree because that's what I was going to say. So
Okay.
Oh,
So
okay.
let me pose a question. Let me pose a question out there, and we are almost up on time, so I'm gonna put that out there too. But yeah, I'm gonna pose a question out there. So, do you believe that in modern society, society as we know it today, um, it is more beneficial for men to go out and create what they need to create on their own, get what they need for themselves, so on and so forth, be those hunters that innately is within men, being the hunter, hunting for the creation of their own foundation? Or do you believe that men should just essentially take what society gives them in the scope of how society is more so foundationally ran? What do y'all think?
I don't think that men are in the business to just sitting back and taking or accepting what society wants to give them. Like, does that make sense? But I also think that, and this is me, we may get some comments after this comment, but when it comes to black men in particular, you got a very large percentage, and I know it's women out there that can attest to this, that are just that they are benefiting off of the women. They're happy to just kind of, not do shit. I don't know how else to say it. They are complacent. They are okay with it. And you have, and I'm not talking about in an environment where there's an understanding, where there is some type of agreement between the woman and the man. No, I'm talking about like leashes. Like, you know what I mean? But go ahead, say what you're gonna say. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I had to say that.
Okay. Do you believe that foundationally that is spawned from the disbanding of the black homes, in addition to the aspect of the dynamic that you talked about before, which is what I agree with in the scope of raising your daughters and loving your sons?
I do think that some of it is from the disbanding of the black home because you have in the black home there's a lot of dysfunction. Yes, there's psychological differences between both genders, but when you're talking about raising children, if you know me, I have to take this back to the Willie Lynch letter because to me
Take it
it
back.
just makes more sense. It's all in there, and I don't think that people, especially our people, are really understanding what's in that letter and what's in that letter is being kind of displayed and impacted on our black, specifically our black men
There,
today,
there
and
is
how black
so
men are raising black sons today.
there is
Like I,
so much there is so much knowledge out there that oftentimes our people don't know what knowledge to delve into. You know,
that's,
it's like you have this big old pot of go paradox of choice. You got this big old pot of information. You want the information that creates the path of least resistance more so. You don't want the information that is going to probably foundationally make you think and potentially may give you like a slight brain aneurysm. you know Nobody wants to delve into stuff that foundationally may make you work harder than what you would need to work toward. A lot of us don't. A lot of us have this tendency to not do that. But then when you end up having a foundation where more so a parent of yours was so focused on keeping you away from certain anguishes that you needed to be able to actually build yourself up better because they loved you, right? Then that reinforces a mindset of path of least resistance, where you may not even understand, oh, I needed to go through this anguish to be able to build myself up to this level. You may not even get it. You may not even have had any type of role model that was willing to reinforce that in your life, you know? Or you may end up later on down the line, end up finding someone who gave you an example, let alone you all of a sudden ended up creating an example for yourself in a certain way that now helps you to be on that path of growth, on that path of needed resistance. You know? Now, biggest thing that I will say, a lot of people do need to read the Willie Lynch letter, you know? Because a lot of people will say, well, there's no point in reading the Willie Lynch letter because of the fact that Willie Lynch never existed. But the ideology that is in that letter did.
The ideology that's in that letter is evident today, every day.
Well,
When I
yes.
look down the street, it is evident right now. A lot of people don't.
A lot of
And I
people,
mean like in multiple aspects. In
they
multiple aspects,
they
it
will
is
completely
evident.
dismiss. They will completely dismiss the validity of the letter because they go on, oh, how can we delve into an ideology based on a person that never existed? Well, we also have to think about the ideology itself. In addition to the fact that maybe Willie Lynch is just a pseudonym for all those masters back in the day that were implementing said ideology. You know, that also can be a thing to think about. You know, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that let me take it back to education. You know, and let me ask this: y'all want to cut it now, or y'all want to talk a little bit more? What y'all got something?
I'm okay. I think Kyra should answer, and maybe Lady D, but I'm okay.
Okay, Kara, you
I can stay on till 5:30, and then I have to jump off.
okay? What about you, Lady D? I know you just randomly popped in the car somewhere.
I got a call while we was on a photo shoot call while we was on this call, so I had to get dressed. I'm on my way to this drag queen photo shoot. Boom.
I am definitely gonna edit all of this out. Okay, so all right, uh,
I gotta
all
go where
right.
the money reside. Where the money reside. I gotta go
Hey,
where the money at.
I totally get it. Nevertheless, nevertheless, all right. Final note. Final note. I'm gonna take it there. Final note. All right. For Black people in the United States specifically, one of the things that we have to be cautious of and understanding of, especially when it comes down to the new generations of us that are coming up, is being able to understand differences in us that is necessary for us to be able to educate one another. You know, that young boy is different than that young girl. That young girl is different than that young boy. In addition to the dynamic or the disposition of having to also understand, okay, what does black mean to them? You know, what does black mean to us? What does black mean to their specific parents? You know, are they conveying to their children, one, being able to understand who they are, from a historical context? And I'm not talking about, just the inception of this country, because that's, oftentimes where we as black people stop when it comes down to our own education, you know, in understanding self. but I'm also talking about the aspect of, before the inception of this country, you know, being able to be given various examples of greatness that will also reinforce a sense of greatness in themselves, which also helps them to foundationally understand, okay, well, if I'm told this, then I don't necessarily have to believe that. I can understand that maybe it's going to take time for me to be able to learn this particular concept, you know? And I'm not one of the ones where it's always going to have to take time for me to learn something. I still also have the ability to be able to get something like that with a finger snap, time frame. You know, it's just being able to understand all of the dynamics and the nuances of what I know I'm good at that I still need to hone and craft out, in addition to what I'm not necessarily good at that I need to perfect. But being able to convey that knowledge through various learning methods. And oftentimes, those various learning methods, are needing to be understood based on the particular gender that you're conveying knowledge to. With that said, I'm Frank, and I enjoyed the conversation today. And with that said, this is the end of the episode. Y'all take it easy. Had a wonderful week. Yeah.